I walked into the wedding hall alone, the soft click of my heels drowned out by the music and laughter echoing off the high ceilings. My navy blue dress felt heavier with every step, as if it carried the weight of every glance that flicked toward me and then away. It was beautiful, elegant even, but on me it felt like a flag announcing my aloneness. Clusters of guests swirled around champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres, their conversations rising in a collective hum that made me feel like a single, discordant note. I adjusted the neckline of my dress and tried to focus on my breathing. Inhale, exhale, step forward. My legs kept moving even as my heart pounded out a beat that didn't match the music. I spotted Kimberly near the bar, already whispering into someone's ear. Her eyes met mine for a brief second, and I saw it, that glint of mean amusement she never really bothered to hide. She turned back to her friend, lips curling as she said something that made the other girls smirk. I didn't have to hear it to know what it was like. They always thought they were subtle, but they never were. I shifted my eyes away and made my way through the crowd, past tables of relatives I hadn't seen in years. Some offered nods of recognition, others didn't even bother pretending they remembered me. My mother waved at me with a forced smile, her eyes scanning me like a doctor searching for symptoms. Pity clung to her face like perfume, sweet and stifling. She patted the empty seat beside her, but I shook my head. I didn't want to sit there and pretend.
Pretend I was okay.
Pretend I wasn't exactly what they expected me to be, alone, quiet, slightly too intense. Dad didn't even look up. He was too busy talking to Uncle Rick some story about investments in cabins and things I was never invited to. He nodded at something Rick said and sipped his drink, not even noticing me and not even glancing. It used to hurt more. Now, it just added another layer to the numbness I wore like armor. I finally found an empty spot near the back corner of the hall. It wasn't hidden, but it felt like safety. A small table with a half-empty water glass and a crumpled napkin. I sat there, keeping my back straight, pretending I was just waiting for someone. Anyone. Pretending I wasn't close to crying. The music was soft now, strings and piano, and the bride was glowing up front, holding on to a love I didn't believe in anymore. I studied her for a moment, her laughter bubbling as she adjusted her veil and leaned into her new husband. She looked radiant, genuinely so, like she had never had her heart broken or sat in a therapist's office trying to unlearn the way she loved. I tried to summon some happiness for her. I tried to feel something other than envy, but it pressed in on me, a low ache behind my ribs. For a second, I let my eyes close, just to breathe, just to let the ache inside me settle. I could already picture what Kimberly had whispered to her friend. Something sharp and saccharine. Something about how I always looked like I was holding my breath, waiting for a life that never showed up. Something about how I never brought a date to anything. I always hovered around the edges like I was allergic to belonging. Then, without warning, the double doors slammed open with a force that silenced everything for half a beat. All heads turned, and in walked someone no one expected. But before I get to that moment, I have to take you back. I grew up in Boston, in a house where silence often said more than words. From a young age, I was the responsible one. The one who remembered dentist appointments, helped fold the laundry, and brought home report cards filled with A's. I didn't scream for attention or throw tantrums. I simply did what was expected of me. And somehow that made me invisible. Kimberly, on the other hand, was the star. Loud, emotional, and dramatic in all the ways that drew everyone's eyes. When she cried, the whole house stopped. When she succeeded, the walls echoed with celebration. I used to think maybe if I just tried harder, did more, they'd look at me the way they looked at her. But no matter how many trophies I lined up on my shelf, Kimberly's smile in a new dress or her latest boyfriend made everyone forget them. I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't like her. I didn't need the spotlight. I didn't crave applause. But deep down, I wanted to be seen. Not for my grades or my posture or my ability to keep a secret. Just seen. So I pushed myself through high school, college, grad school. All of it with blinders on. I told myself it was for me, that I wanted to build a life I could be proud of. And I did, in a way. I landed a great job, made enough money to support myself, rented a sunlit apartment on the 5th floor of a quiet building with hardwood floors and a little balcony I never used. I bought groceries for one and arranged my books alphabetically. Everything was in its place. But when I came home at night, it was just me and the hum of the refrigerator. There were no candlelit dinners or spontaneous getaways. There was no one to talk to about my day, no one waiting for me to come home. Sometimes I told myself that was fine. I needed the quiet. Other nights, I stared at the ceiling and wondered what I had done wrong. Kimberly, meanwhile, had gotten engaged for the second time by 28. Her Instagram looked like a highlight reel from a rom-com. People liked that. They liked photos of hand-holding and latte art and smiling couples on beaches. No one wants to see a woman sitting alone at her desk at 10 p.m., eating noodles straight from the pot. Then there was Alex. We were together for 3 years. He made me laugh, listened to my plans, and told me he admired how driven I was. I believed him. I trusted him. Until I found out he'd been sleeping with someone else, someone less intense, as he put it. That phrase carved itself into me like a knife. Less intense. As if the depth of my love, my ambition, my presence, had been too much for him. As if what I had offered had been more of a burden than a gift. After him, I stopped expecting anyone to stay. I built walls. I learned how to rely on no one but myself. I became good at solitude. Too good, maybe. So now, back in that hall, in that navy dress that felt more like a spotlight than a shield, I waited. I waited in the quiet corner of the room, pretending I didn't notice the stairs, pretending my heart wasn't tightening with every laugh I wasn't a part of. And then the doors flew open. There was a pause, a shared breath, a collective lean forward. And just like that, everything changed. The thing is, when you're the strong one, no one checks in on you.
They assume you're fine.
You become a safe place for others, even while you're crumbling inside. I became good at hiding the cracks, practiced at it, smiling while something inside me caved in just a little more, nodding along while people confided in me, reassured by how together I always seemed. So when the invitation came for Jessica's wedding, I didn't hesitate. I RSVP'd for one. I typed it without blinking. But that didn't stop my mother from calling the moment she saw the envelope. You sure you don't want to bring someone, sweetheart? A friend, maybe? I'm fine, Mom. There was a pause on the line, then a sigh so soft I almost missed it.
Okay. Just thought it might be nice. Nice.
Not kind. Not comforting. Not even thoughtful. No, what she meant was simple. It would look better. Less awkward. Less like failure. Less like me. I hung up and went back to my work, pretending it didn't sting. Pretending her sigh didn't echo in the quiet room, circling the way silence always did when you lived alone. I opened my laptop, forced my eyes onto spreadsheets and reports. Numbers were easy. Predictable. People were not. And now, sitting in that wedding hall, alone in my navy blue dress, I felt the weight of every comparison, every second I'd spent trying to prove I was enough. All those years of being the reliable one, the stable one, the one who held it all together. None of it mattered here. Here, all they saw was that I came without a date. That Kimberly had brought someone new again, dazzling in her red heels and perfect lipstick. That I was the one still alone. But I hadn't come to be seen. I came because I owed it to Jessica. Because I wasn't going to hide from moments just because they were hard. I was tired of skipping life just to avoid the whispers. So I stayed. And then those doors flew open. Heads turned. Murmurs rose. But whoever had just arrived remained out of my line of sight, blocked by a wall of tuxedos and sequins. I didn't bother craning my neck. Drama had a way of seeking Kimberly out like a magnet. I assumed this was just another guest from her side of the list, fashionably late and eager to make an entrance. The ceremony was beautiful, of course. Jessica looked radiant, the kind of glowing that photographs never quite capture. The kind of glow that comes from being deeply loved and knowing it. I tried to focus on her, on the vows, on the way her voice caught when she promised forever, but the knot in my stomach only tightened. It started right after the ceremony, during the walk toward the reception hall. I was doing my best to blend in with the flow of pastel dresses and rented tuxedos when Aunt Linda swooped in with a glass of champagne in one hand and her patented grin in place. "Still single, Natalie?" she asked, nudging me like we were co-conspirators in some sitcom. I smiled politely. "Yes, still." She leaned in, lowering her voice as if this was a secret worth keeping. "Well, you're young.
Still time.
Don't wait too long, though. Eggs don't freeze themselves, you know." She laughed at her joke and wandered off before I could respond, leaving the bitterness to settle on my tongue like bad wine. When I found my name card at the reception, it was at a small round table tucked near the edge of the dance floor. Table 11. The singles table. My fellow tablemates were a mix of distant cousins and vague family friends I barely remembered. One guy, Robbie or Ronnie, I wasn't sure, kept telling stories about his crypto investments, pausing only to check his phone for price alerts. Another girl, Emma, was live streaming parts of the wedding on her phone, narrating it like she was hosting her reality show. It all felt surreal, like I had stepped into some kind of twisted matchmaking game show. There was no escape except the bathroom or the bar, and I'd already been to both. The night wore on. At one point, Uncle Dan leaned across the table and said, "I know a guy I could introduce you to. He's recently divorced, 2 kids, but stable." I gave him a thin smile. "That's generous, but I'm fine." He chuckled, swirled the ice in his glass. "You won't be forever." My wine glass was rarely empty, and I couldn't decide if that was a blessing or a trap. Each sip dulled the edge, but also lowered my guard. Every few minutes, someone new would stop by my table to say hello, each interaction laced with undertones they thought I wouldn't notice. "Still working too hard? You've got to stop being so picky. Don't worry, your time will come." Like my life was a delayed delivery. Like I'd simply forgotten to check a box on the order form. It was exhausting being perceived like that. Like the one who had everything but the one thing that mattered. Not the one they congratulated, just the one they pitted. And I couldn't stop remembering the bridal shower. The pink decor. The gifts were wrapped in soft paper. The games, oh God, the games. One of them was a quiz about who would be next to get married. My name came up, and the room burst into polite laughter. Someone shouted, "Only if she stops dating spreadsheets." I laughed, too. What else could I do? But I felt small. I felt like the punchline. That moment had stayed with me longer than it should have. It echoed every time someone called me driven in that tight, awkward tone. As if ambition was some curse I needed to apologize for. As if I had traded love for success and had no right to ask for both. The music picked up again, and couples began to dance. Jessica and her new husband took the floor first, their steps slow and careful, like they were moving through a world no one else could touch. I watched them and let myself feel it, not envy this time, but grief. For the versions of myself that had believed love would come just because I earned it. For the nights I waited for someone who never chose me. For the times I told myself I didn't need anyone at all, just so I wouldn't feel the emptiness echo. Then someone tapped my shoulder. I turned, half expecting another cousin with a well-meaning suggestion, but it wasn't a cousin. It was someone else entirely. And suddenly, the late arrival at the ceremony made sense. It was Ethan, and I hadn't seen him in nearly 10 years. Now here I was again, sitting in a circle of smiling faces that all seemed to look right through me. The music swelled as the couple shared their first dance. Everyone clapped, phones held high to capture a love worth remembering. And I sat there clapping too, but with a heart that felt like glass under pressure. I wasn't bitter about love. Not really. I was just tired of feeling like my life was a cautionary tale. Tired of having to prove I was okay. Tired of being asked to explain why I hadn't yet become what they thought I should be. For them, this was just a wedding. For me, it felt like an exhibit. A reminder. A quiet humiliation wrapped in white linen and floral centerpieces. Even the napkins felt smug, folded into little swans as if they too were part of some perfect world I wasn't invited into. The music had just dipped into a slow jazz number when the double doors at the back of the hall swung open again, not with a creak, but with a bold, deliberate burst. Heads turned, necks craned. Even the DJ paused for half a beat. Standing in the entrance, framed by the golden light of the hallway, was Sebastian Reed. Yes, that's Sebastian Reed. The tech billionaire. The man whose face had been on the cover of every major magazine, whose startup had exploded into global success seemingly overnight. Tall, sharp-jawed, dressed in a black tailored suit with just the right amount of nonchalance. He looked like he had stepped out of a movie scene and onto the polished floor of my cousin's wedding. I stared, frozen. Everyone did. He scanned the room for a second, and then, God help me, his eyes landed on me. And then he smiled. Confident, warm, like we were old friends. Like he belonged here. Like I belonged to him. He strode through the room with the ease of someone used to attention, ignoring the whispers that followed his every step. My mouth went dry. Every cell in my body screamed that this had to be a mistake. But it wasn't. He reached my table, placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, and leaned down like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sorry, I'm late, sweetheart. Couldn't get away from the boardroom. He kissed my cheek lightly. My skin tingled. My mind went blank. I opened my mouth, closed it again, then somehow found the presence of mind to nod and smile. Traffic. I offered weakly. He laughed. That too. The entire table went silent. Even Robbie the crypto guy forgot what blockchain was. Every eye was on us. Someone whispered my name like a question. Emma dropped her phone. Seconds later, a wedding coordinator appeared out of thin air. Mr. Reed, we weren't expecting you, she said breathlessly. He smiled graciously. I was invited as Natalie's guest. I hope that's all right. Her face flushed. Of course, sir. We'll move you both to the VIP table. Within moments, we were ushered across the room to the long, flower-laced table near the bride and groom. Chairs were shifted. People scooted over. I took my seat beside Sebastian as if it was perfectly normal to have a billionaire crash a family wedding and declare himself mine. Around us, the whispers turned into stares. My mother blinked rapidly, her mouth parted in disbelief. Kimberly looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Dad finally looked up. And just like that, everything changed. Suddenly, I was no longer the girl at the singles table. No longer the woman who had come alone. I was someone interesting. Someone enviable. Someone who was dating Sebastian Reed. And I had no idea why. At the VIP table, I kept my posture upright, legs crossed at the ankles like I wasn't internally screaming. Sebastian sat beside me, cool as ever, sipping from a crystal glass of sparkling water as if he hadn't just turned my entire life into a surreal fever dream. I leaned toward him, keeping my voice low. What are you doing? He didn't look at me, just smiled, still watching the room. Helping. Helping. I echoed. Do I look like I need help? He finally met my eyes. You looked like you wanted to disappear. That stunned me into silence. Mostly because he was right. And because it hurt a little to be seen that. But how do you even know who I am? I asked. We met at the Harvard Entrepreneurship panel. You asked me about founder fatigue. I remembered you. I blinked. That panel was over 2 years ago. I barely remembered what I had worn, let alone what I'd said. I was impressed, he added. You were the only one who didn't fawn. I was stressed and caffeinated. I said, too stunned to say anything more clever. He chuckled. Still memorable. The toasts began. Jessica's father stood up, teary-eyed and warm. He talked about childhood moments, scraped knees, and the first time she said she loved the groom. People around us dabbed at their eyes with napkins. I just sat there, trying to breathe, to process, to exist without combusting. Why are you here? I whispered. Sebastian looked thoughtful. Because sometimes it's good to remind people that they're not invisible. It felt like he had reached inside my chest and touched something raw. I should have asked more questions. I should have pulled him aside, told him this was too much, Too fast, too absurd. But I didn't. Because for the first time that night, I didn't feel like the outsider. For the first time in what felt like years, people looked at me without pity. Kimberly's lips were pressed into a tight line, her date forgotten. My mother was watching me with a kind of stunned wonder. Even Dad raised his glass when Sebastian said something polite to him. I leaned back in my chair, allowed myself to feel it, this strange, surreal warmth. The soft edges of belonging. The tiny spark of possibility. I didn't know what would happen after tonight. Maybe Sebastian would disappear back into his world of boardrooms and media deals. Maybe we'd laugh about this someday. Or maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something I hadn't dared to hope for in a long time. Either way, for now, I allowed myself to exist in this moment. To take up space at the VIP table. To be the woman who didn't settle for crumbs and silence. I wasn't an exhibit anymore. I was part of the story. He leaned in slightly, voice low. You okay? I nodded. Barely. Who are you, and why are you saving me? He smiled. Long story. Let's just say you looked like you needed a parachute. He offered his hand under the table. Sebastian. Obviously. Natalie. I replied, shaking it. His palm was warm, steady. Though I guess you already knew that. Guilty. You looked like you were trying to melt into your chair. I couldn't let you drown alone. We laughed softly, just between us. And for the first time that day, I felt my breath finally start to return. Like I wasn't suffocating in my skin anymore. Soon after, someone asked how we met. Sebastian didn't miss a beat. We were seated next to each other at a fundraiser in New York. She corrected a financial projection mid-presentation. Blew everyone away. I blinked, then caught on. And you introduced yourself after the panel. Said something about wanting to hire me. I lied, he said with a grin. I just wanted her number. It was absurd, flawless, and a little intoxicating. Like slipping into a story that had already been written, one where I got to be something other than background noise. As the night went on, the line between performance and reality blurred. Sebastian was attentive, warm, without being possessive. He made space for me to speak, laughed at my dry jokes, and asked questions that didn't feel obligatory. He didn't pretend to be impressed, he was. He talked about books, he read more than I expected, and travel, and the weird pressure to perform our lives for other people's comfort. It was surreal how easy it felt to talk to him. Even more surreal how safe it felt. Like I wasn't just playing pretend. Like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a performance anymore. And then Kimberly walked by. Oh wow, she said, lips pressed into a disingenuous smile. Natalie, you didn't tell us you were dating Sebastian Reed. I would have gotten a better gift. Her words were coated in sugar, but the blade underneath gleamed sharp. I felt my stomach twist, my body bracing instinctively. Before I could respond, Sebastian stood and turned toward her with a calm, pointed smile. I'm a lucky man, he said. Natalie doesn't waste time trying to impress people who don't deserve her. Kimberly blinked. Just a flicker of surprise, quickly masked by her usual practice charm.
Right.
Well, good for you both. She walked off, heels clicking a little too loudly, and I felt something I hadn't in years, defended. Sebastian sat again and looked at me. Was that too much? I shook my head, a little dazed.
No.
It was perfect. The noise of the reception carried on around us. Plates clinked, toasts were made, and laughter rose and fell like waves. But between us, something had shifted. The joke wasn't a joke anymore. The act was starting to feel like something else, something solid. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Not for what I lacked, not as a project or a punchline, but for who I was. And I didn't want it to end. It couldn't last, of course. I knew that. People like Kimberly don't let illusions survive if they're not the ones spinning them. She started circling like a hawk during dinner, asking too many questions with that faux-curious smile. Where did they meet again? What fundraiser? Had they posted any pictures together? Her voice sugary, but her eyes sharp. She was digging, looking for cracks. By the time dessert was served, I saw her texting furiously. Her phone screen glowed like a threat just out of reach. 15 minutes later, she cornered us on the terrace, the distant music from the dance floor muffled by the glass doors behind her. "Well," she said, arms folded across her designer dress, "I did a little browsing. No press photos. No mentions. No social posts. Kind of weird for a tech billionaire, don't you think?" Sebastian stepped forward, calm but firm. "Not everything in my life ends up online." Kimberly smirked.
Sure.
"But a woman like Natalie? She'd post about a guy like you." My chest tightened. The way she said it, a woman like Natalie, said everything.
Plain.
Predictable. Alone. Of course, someone like me wouldn't have someone like him. I turned toward Sebastian and shook my head. "It's okay." "Natalie," he started, but I held up my hand.
No.
"She's right." Kimberly's smirk deepened, but I ignored her. "This isn't real," I said, voice steady even as my stomach sank. "He was just being kind. That's all. It's not what it looked like." The look on Sebastian's face broke something in me. Not because he looked smug or embarrassed, he didn't. He looked disappointed. Sad even. But he nodded. "All right." I turned to Kimberly. "You win." She blinked, surprised at how easily I let go. She expected a fight. I didn't have it in me. I walked back inside, my head held high. My heart was heavy, sure, but not because of shame. It was something else. Something more complicated. At the table, my dessert sat untouched. A piece of cake with sugared petals and a name card I suddenly couldn't bear to look at. I excused myself again, this time finding refuge in the quiet of the powder room. I sat on the edge of the velvet bench, pressed my hands into my lap, and let myself breathe. Why did it hurt? It had all been fake, hadn't it? Except it hadn't. Not entirely. That feeling, that warmth, that ease, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, it had felt true. And that scared me more than anything else. When I finally returned to the hall, Sebastian was gone. No dramatic exit. No lingering gaze from across the room. Just gone. The night carried on without him. More dancing. More laughter. More champagne. I drifted through it like a ghost, nodding, smiling, accepting compliments I didn't feel. Later, as guests began leaving and chairs were pushed back from tables, Jessica pulled me into a hug. "I don't know what that was," she whispered, "but I've never seen you shine like that." I smiled and nodded and said all the right things. "Congratulations."
Thank you. So happy for you.
But inside, I was already rewinding. To his hand on my shoulder. For the way he made space for me. To the moment he looked at me like I wasn't background noise. And when I finally got home, kicked off my heels, and sat alone in my apartment, I pulled out my phone. There was a message waiting. From Sebastian. "I meant it, you know. All of it. Let me know when you're ready to stop pretending." Sebastian glanced at his phone, which had been vibrating in his pocket.
He sighed.
"I have to go. One of my companies is under a cyber attack. No choice." "Of course," I said, almost grateful for the excuse to disappear. He paused, then looked me in the eyes. "Natalie, for what it's worth, this wasn't all fake. Not for me." I swallowed hard but didn't answer. He lingered just a second longer, then turned and walked down the terrace steps into the night, disappearing into the swirl of lights and valet cars below. I stood there under the string lights, arms wrapped around myself, suddenly cold. The act was over. The stares would return now, not with curiosity, but with judgment, maybe even pity again. I could already feel the weight of the glances that would follow me back inside. The ones that said, "We knew it was too good to be true." But somewhere underneath the sting, I knew the truth. For a few hours, I had felt seen. I felt worth standing up for. And even if it had all been temporary, even if it had begun as a fantasy, it had meant something real to me. The day after the wedding, I called Olivia. She'd been my closest friend since college, the one person who had seen me cry over missed chances and microwave dinners, who had never once made me feel small. She answered on the second ring, her voice still thick with sleep. "I need to tell you something," I said, and then I told her everything: Sebastian, the charade, Kimberly, the confrontation on the terrace. There was a long pause. Then she sighed. Okay, so it was messy. But you weren't wrong for wanting someone to show up for you. That doesn't make you weak, Nat. It makes you human. Her words settled into something I didn't know I needed. Because maybe that had been the hardest part, not feeling foolish for falling into a moment, but feeling guilty for wanting it in the first place. I wasn't ashamed of wanting a connection. I was just tired of pretending I didn't. A few days later, I messaged Kimberly and asked to meet for lunch. Not to fight. Not to rehash the drama.
Just to talk.
I didn't know what I expected, but I knew I couldn't keep carrying the bitterness. It was wearing me down. She showed up in oversized sunglasses and a designer blouse, all gloss and posture, but the moment we sat down, something in her face softened. She stirred her iced tea like it was a nervous tick. I didn't mean to humiliate you, she said without looking up. I was just jealous, I guess. You looked happy. I blinked. Of me? She nodded. You have your own life. You know who you are. I've been trying so hard to look like I have it all together, and it's exhausting. Her words felt strange coming from her, the sister who always seemed composed, envied, and adored. But sitting across from me now, she looked tired in a way I recognized. A kind of soul exhaustion that no amount of makeup or perfectly arranged Instagram stories could mask. For a while, we just sat in silence. Then I said, we've spent our whole lives being compared. Maybe it's time we stop doing it to ourselves. Her eyes watered, and for once, she didn't bother to hide it. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. But it was something close. A beginning. Later that week, I visited my parents. I didn't dress up or rehearse what I'd say. I just walked in, sat down at the kitchen table, and let the words come. I always felt like I had to earn your attention. Like being dependable wasn't enough unless it came with applause. My mom's face crumpled first. My dad looked like I'd slapped him. I'm not blaming you, I added quickly. I just need you to see me. Not just the version you imagined, but me. Who am I? It wasn't a smooth conversation. There were long silences. Some defensiveness. A few tears. But by the end, my mom reached across the table and took my hand. I see you now, she whispered. And maybe for the first time, I believed her. It was a quiet Sunday evening when my phone buzzed. I had just curled up on the couch, wearing mismatched socks and eating takeout straight from the container. A single message lit up the screen. Sebastian, can I see you? I stared at it for a long time, fingers hovering over the screen, heart thudding harder than it should have. Then I typed back. You're kind of dramatic, you know that? A moment later. Sebastian, I'm downstairs. I froze. Pulled the curtain aside. Sure enough, there he was, standing in front of my building like some kind of surreal epilogue to a dream I hadn't finished reading. I buzzed him in. When I opened the door, he was standing in the hallway holding 2 coffees and looking entirely out of place in my worn-down building. But his smile was cautious this time, not cocky. Like he knew this wasn't a joke anymore. I didn't come to play the hero, he said as I let him in. I remembered you. From a conference 8 months ago. You were on a panel. You said something about how women aren't taken seriously unless they're either cold or perfect. It stuck with me. I blinked. You remembered that? I remembered you. He set the coffees down and ran a hand through his hair. When I saw you at the wedding, sitting there like you were trying to disappear, I just acted. And I'd do it again. But I should have asked. I looked at him, really looked at him. Not the polished figure from the magazines. Not the fantasy. Just the man in front of me, standing a little too tall, as if bracing for rejection. I don't know what this is, I said. Neither do I, he replied. But I know it wasn't fake. And if you'd let me, I'd like to find out what it could be. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't fireworks. It was just the beginning. I took one of the coffees and gestured toward the couch. Okay. But you're buying dinner next time. And I don't mean caviar. He grinned, and we sat. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to earn the moment. I didn't have to shrink or polish or prove. I just had to be. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You turned my life into a rom-com for a night. Sebastian laughed softly, the the corners of his mouth lifting into that easy, unhurried smile I was starting to recognize as real, not performative. I know. And I swear, this isn't part of the script. I'd just like to see you. For real. No pretending. No spotlight. I studied him for a long second. He was still standing there like the hallway hadn't changed since he arrived, holding a coffee for me like it was the only offering he could make. No fanfare. No expectations. I nodded.
Okay.
One date. His grin was slow, warm. You won't regret it. I wasn't so sure. But for once, I wasn't afraid to find out. The next 6 months unfolded nothing like I expected, and everything I needed. Sebastian and I went on real dates. Not the fantasy kind with designer lighting and photo-worthy outfits. No rooftop fireworks or celebrity appearances. Just us. Walks through the city as the sun sets behind old brick buildings. Diners that served greasy fries and the best milkshakes in town. Quiet nights with takeout and black and white movies, where we fell asleep mid-conversation with half-eaten popcorn between us. He didn't try to impress me, and I stopped trying to be impressive. We talked about everything. His fear of being reduced to headlines and numbers. My fear of fading into the background. He told me about the pressure to keep building, growing, staying relevant, how exhausting it was to never just be. I told him how I'd spent years trying to prove my worth, waiting for someone to say, "You matter, too." And slowly, the walls I'd built began to soften. I didn't tear them down all at once, I just made space. For warmth. For mistakes. For him. He learned how I took my coffee, how I liked my books stacked in piles instead of shelves, how I talked to myself when I thought no one was listening. I learned that despite all his wealth and control, he sometimes needed silence more than answers. He kept a dog-eared copy of The Little Prince by his bed. He hated olives but loved olive oil. He was complicated, but never cruel. Driven but not unkind. My family changed, too, in small but real ways. My mother started asking how I was feeling, not just what I was achieving. She still had that tone sometimes, the one that said she was trying to say the right thing instead of the honest one. But she was trying. And that meant more than I expected. My dad started sending me articles he thought I'd enjoy. One day, he called me out of nowhere. No reason. No news. Just, "Hey, I was thinking about you. Proud of you, Nat." I hung up and cried in the hallway, a little stunned at how healing could sound so simple. And one night over dinner, while laughter echoed around the table and someone passed the wine, Sebastian reached for my hand beneath the linen napkins. And no one looked away. No one stiffened. It just was. Even Kimberly changed. She took a step back from curating her life. Started teaching yoga twice a week, something she said was grounding. She posted less, laughed more. She didn't apologize for who she'd been, but she wasn't hiding behind it anymore either. We weren't suddenly best friends, but we were finally something better, honest. None of it made me magically fixed. I still had days when doubt curled against my chest like fog. Still had moments when old insecurities whispered that I was too much, too driven, too quiet, too stubborn, too whatever. But now I had someone who knew how to quiet those voices, not with empty reassurance, but with presence, with truth, with the reminder that I wasn't hard to love. I'd just been loving the wrong way. For the first time, love didn't feel like something I had to earn. It just felt like coming home. Thanksgiving arrived with a scent of roasted garlic, cinnamon, and something warm baking in the oven. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking into a spotlight. I wasn't rehearsing my answers or adjusting my posture before knocking on the door. The house was filled with the chaotic comfort I remembered, pots clanging, laughter from the living room, the hum of old jazz floating softly from the stereo. It felt familiar, but not suffocating. It felt lived in. Sebastian walked beside me, one hand balancing a pie box, the other resting lightly at the small of my back. There was no tension in his body. No stiffness. Just quiet certainty, like he belonged beside me. My mother greeted us at the door.
Her smile was wide, not forced.
"Hi, sweetheart," she said, pulling me into a hug before turning to Sebastian. We're so glad you're here. At dinner, Dad asked Sebastian about his favorite childhood books, not his company's. About his hobbies, not his headlines. About the time he tried cooking pasta and accidentally set off his penthouse fire alarm. Kimberly teased him about it later, but there was no edge in her voice. Just teasing. Just sisterly banter. She complimented the pumpkin bread I brought, something I used to overthink, and asked if I wanted to help with a holiday fundraiser she was organizing. I said yes and meant it. Somewhere between the second round of pie and the fire crackling in the living room, Sebastian leaned in close, his voice low and steady, just for me. I was thinking, he began, fingers brushing mine under the blanket. Next year, we do this again. Same table. Same chaos. Just with a couple of new traditions of our own. I turned to him, heart full in that quiet, steady way I had finally learned to trust. You like Thanksgiving now, don't you? He smiled. I like you. I laughed and leaned into him, letting my head rest lightly against his shoulder. No fireworks. No performance. Just warmth. Just presence. As the night slowed and everyone drifted into that satisfied holiday days, I looked around the room. My family, my partner, my place in it all. And I thought back to that wedding. That navy blue dress. The singles table. The eyes that passed over me. The way I felt like a failure just for showing up alone. But the truth is that moment, those whispers, that awkward table, even the embarrassment, was the start of something. It cracked open the version of me I had tried so hard to protect. It pushed me toward discomfort. Toward honesty. Toward the kind of connection that wasn't filtered or forced. And now I knew something I had never fully believed back then. I wasn't just enough. I had always been. And I wasn't alone anymore, not because someone showed up to rescue me, but because I finally started showing up for myself.